Hi, everybody. I'm Elysabeth Alfano, CEO of VegTech Invest and the host of the Plant-Based Business Hour. And also, I'll give a little plug to my other podcast, Awesome Vegans. Yes, I still do the Awesome Vegans podcast. In fact, today's interview is a bit of a harken back to my Awesome Vegan podcast days. I want to bring on someone whose career as a corporate lawyer wasn't giving her really all that she wanted. Excuse me, and she decided to become a children's book author, and she did it for animals. Great story. Let's dive into it. I want to bring on today's guest, Christine Mott. Christine, thanks for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. I'm thrilled to be here to share about my new book about Flaco the owl.
So this is wonderful. Your new book, as I understand it, is just out, like within days, yes?
Yes, it officially drops May 6th. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.com, and will be in local bookstores near you as well. But it's called Free Bird, Flaco the Owl's Dreams Take Flight. And for those of you who don't know Flaco soared to fame after he escaped from his enclosure at the Central Park Zoo about 2 years ago. And for the first time in his life, got to be a real owl. Flew all around Manhattan, enjoyed all sorts of exploits, and captured the attention of the world. And I really wanted his story and legacy to live on through this children's book, which I wrote, and will be available, as I said, in just a few short weeks.
Yes. Okay. So everyone, you've got your marching orders. It's Freebird, Flaco the Owl's Dreams Take Flight. Let's take a minute. And of course, you can get that on Amazon.com. Just go in there, Freebird, Flaco the Owl, and you'll find it. And for those listening on audio, I'm sorry, it's the video people who get to see. The link is also at the very bottom of this video, folks. But, just Amazon.com and Google Flaco the Owl. Okay. So why did Flaco the Owl's story captivate you? Why did you want to make this your first? So not easy to go from corporate lawyer, and we'll figure out why you left that behind, but to go from corporate lawyer to children's book author, and this is your first story. Why this story?
It is. I think like millions of people, I was really just touched by Flaco's story. I'm a longtime animal lover, animal advocate, also a mom of 2 little girls. So I read so many stories, to my girls, and I'm raising them to be future animal advocates. They know we as a family don't patronize the zoo, and they knew why we believe that wild animals should not be held in captivity. When Flaco escaped and his exploits were featured, in the New York Times, local news media, he became a celebrity, and it was just amazing, a feel-good story that everybody wanted to root for Flaco. The underdog, the quintessential New Yorker, the little guy that you want to cheer for as he suffers for so long and is finally able to achieve his dreams. And I love telling the story, as Flaco was flying around New York to my kids, and they were captivated by it. And then, of course, after enjoying a year of freedom, poor Flaco passed away. He had a sad collision with a building in New York City. Part of the reason why he collided with the building was he also had rat poison in his system. We can get to kind of what all those things mean for Flaco and other birds, but it was a bittersweet moment where this poor bird, who had never had the chance to be an owl, he was able to enjoy himself for that year out of the 12 years of his life. And having to weigh that 1 year of freedom with all the suffering that he endured, living in this isolated, terrible enclosure, which was the size of a bus stop. It had a fake branch, a painted mural of the mountains. It was just a far reach from where Flaco was supposed to be in his life as the largest species of owl in the world. He had a 6-foot wingspan and literally couldn't fly in that enclosure. So all that is to say, it was such an amazing story, and I didn't want to let it pass by, because I think it not only captivated me, my children, but so clearly captivated the world. I remember reading Flaco's obituary in the New York Times. There's this beautiful article of basically his life, his year of freedom, and his ultimate demise. And I checked today, there are over 1,000 comments in the comment section. And I remember the day he passed away, reading through hundreds of them. And so many of them were the sentiment of fly free, Flaco. You deserved a life of freedom, and we as humans failed you in denying you that. We're so glad you had that opportunity. In a way, I think Flaco is kind of like a gateway issue to so many other animal issues, because I think, the thousands of people who commented on that article, I don't think they would all necessarily identify as animal rights activists. Somebody out there, protesting all the injustices to animals. But something in Flaco's story really resonated with everyone. Everyone can understand a bird wants to fly and that yearn for freedom. So to me, it was such a golden opportunity to seize upon the essence of Flaco, what captivated the world and drew him into his story. So that's a long-winded answer of why I picked that book.
Touching and loving and frustrating, all at the same time. Was Flaco born in captivity?
He was, yes.
Oh,
he was born in a hatchery in North Carolina, and as a fledgling shipped to the Central Park Zoo. And he lived, 12 years alone in this solitary exhibit. And, Flaco, his species, he's a Eurasian eagle owl. As I said, the largest species of owl in the world. And that species is not actually a threatened species or an endangered species. But yeah, he was held in captivity his whole life. And we'll talk about maybe the ethics of zoos and the purpose of zoos. But, a lot of times zoos talk about conservation efforts and the need to help endangered species. Well, Flaco is an example of a species that was not endangered. The species was at one time where they were hunted and the populations had declined, but today the Eurasian eagle owl is not a threatened species. And so to hold a bird in captivity, especially in such dire circumstances, this horrible barren enclosure, and call it conservation, leads one to question what that really means and what is the purpose of zoos in today's society.
Yeah, and also owls are hunters. So not only can he not fly, which is his natural inclination, he can't hunt. So
Exactly.
he can't be an owl, basically, cannot be an owl. Okay, so I love that New York City took to Flaco and said, we want you to be free. And he sort of became a mascot sort of for the city, no?
He did, absolutely. I mean, almost immediately after the public became aware that he was out, he had his own Twitter account. There were bird watchers saying, like, we spotted Flaco here, he's there. He was immediately just this amazing, underdog in the city that people really wanted to root for and cheer for. And as soon as he did escape, the zoo made many attempts to recapture him. They put out all sorts of traps. There's a famous photograph, which I love, where Flaco actually landed on Fifth Avenue near the famous Bergdorf Goodman, luxury department store. He landed right on the sidewalk, and it's like twilight, and there are sirens and police, and somebody puts down like this baited cage, hoping that he'll just go back in the cage. But of course, he kind of just looks at it like almost insulted, and flies away. And he proceeded to go to all these interesting places throughout Manhattan. He stayed quite a bit of time in the Central Park area where he probably felt most comfortable, but eventually, first had to learn to fly. I mean, just think about that for a second. He didn't know how to fly because he was in an enclosure where he literally could not do that. So he had to learn to fly. Once he did that, he was all over. There are other kind of famous photos of him on people's windowsills, perched in a sculpture garden. He was found in all sorts of places, and I think people just delighted in that. You want to root for him. It was such a feel-good story, especially because once we knew that he could fly, he could hunt and take care of himself, there was no reason why he shouldn't have his moment and remain free.
And why was it that they were trying to recapture him?
Well, at first, look, animals in today's society are considered property under the
Yes.
law. Flaco was the zoo's property, and they had every right under the law to go and retrieve him. And so they made many attempts, and of course, what they stated was, we were afraid Flaco won't be able to take care of himself. He will die right away because he doesn't know how to fly and he doesn't know how to hunt. And within days, actually, I think probably even in less time than that, he had demonstrated, one, that he could fly, and two, that he could hunt and catch food for himself. So once those factors were kind of pushed out of the way, there became this public outrage at continued attempts by the zoo, and they were very aggressive attempts to recapture him. At one point, they were playing distress and mating calls of other owls,
Oh,
trying to lure him back. They would have
oh,
these snares with food where they hoped he would get his talons caught and be
oh.
tangled in a mess, and they'd take him back. So Flaco made his choice, right? He made the choice to leave the enclosure. He could have just stayed and said, look, oh, there's a hole in my house, but I'm just going to stay here. But he didn't want to stay. He left. And then once he left, there were all these opportunities. He could have, I guess, flown back to the enclosure or gone into the little zoo box, but he didn't want to. He made his choice loud and clear. And I think everybody rooted for him.
I love this, that people were rooting for him. I love this, that New York took the side of the owl and really looked down upon the zoo for its tactics. I love that, and that what Flaco was born to do, he naturally learned how to do within a matter of days, if not sooner than that. It's just a great story. And then, of course, his demise, the food that he was eating was probably, rats and mice, which had been poisoned from New York City. So ultimately, the city, not really Flaco's home or an owl's home, although owls do live in Central Park, do they not?
Yes, to other species. So the Eurasian eagle owl, which is what Flaco was, they're native to Eastern Europe. So there were no other Eurasian
Right.
eagle owls, but there were, I think, barred owls, other types of owls that have been spotted and still reside in Central Park. And, there was speculation of whether Flaco might meet a mate of another species and
Oh.
fall in love. We never saw that happen, but we saw Flaco get to, show his stuff, showing down. He had little disputes with, a pack of crows over territory or blue jays. So he did really get to, in the way that he possibly could in this unnatural environment, which was New York City, get to be a real owl for the first time and do so many interesting things.
Freebird, Flaco the Owl's Dreams Take Flight, available on hardcover May 6th. You can order it now, though. Amazon, you see that on the screen, amazon.com. Freebird, Flaco the Owl's Dreams takes flight over New York City, which is just so incredibly cool. As a Eurasian eagle owl, am I saying that right? He was a Eurasian eagle owl. Are they solitary? They must be. Or they're
They actually mate for life. They usually
Oh.
will find a partner and mate for life. They have a territory of about 30 miles, and they would be known to fly quite great distances in a single day. So to look at that, the intended life of the Eurasian eagle owl and the life that Flaco had, it's obviously a big discrepancy. And my first goal was to celebrate Flaco, but the underlying message that I have in the book is helping children and their parents or caregivers, whoever's reading the story to them, connect with the emotional life of an owl, right? And therefore all animals. I think what I want people to come away from in reading this book is an owl, just like you or me, can experience the same emotions and feelings, and probably the most important ones in one's life. And in that way, we are the same, right? We are so different in many other ways. We don't have feathers. We don't fly. Sure, we can point to all sorts of differences, but in the ways that really matter, we're the same. And that's true of all animals. And the goal here is to help children just make that connection. I think so many children do that automatically. And I think as maybe as we grow older, it's, taught out of us that, oh no, we are different. We're humans, we're different. But there are so many ways that we are alike. And in these important ways, we really need to understand that, because it impacts so many things. And I think there's a famous quote. It's as important to teach a child not to step on a caterpillar for that child as it is for the caterpillar. There's so much research that demonstrates the importance of teaching humane education to children. It's actually mandated in many states, like New York. It's simply not taught and enforced. But to help children understand how to humanely treat animals, and the importance of that in their own development, because there's a whole other body of research that demonstrates the link between inhumane treatment of animals and violence and other inhumane treatment towards people, interpersonal violence. You can look at any list of serial killers, school shooters. They all have a history of cruelty to animals. If you look at issues of domestic violence, child abuse, and neglect, there are so often so many overlapping red flag indicators of abuse and neglect of animals in that home, or manipulation and control of and inhumane treatment of animals as a means of continuing that abusive treatment in the home. So to me, it's also just such a cyclical and interrelated concept. And I think that if we can really instill compassion in children, it's taking a huge step to break that cycle of violence and abuse and suffering that we see all too often in the world.
Mm-hmm. And at a tremendous scale. So there's the serial killer torturing of animals. And if my eyes were moving around on screen, it's because I was trying to go back to Google right now and look at the name of the man. I want to say it was the Parkland, Florida shooting. Next time you get to answer a long question, I'll go back to Google and I'll get the name, because everybody will remember this person's name. And you can easily Google to find the correlation between animal cruelty and torturing animals and school shootings. But there was one in particular where it wasn't even hidden. He was torturing animals on YouTube. It was brought to the attention of the police. The police saw this and said, we don't care because it's animals. And then he went on to shoot over 140 children. And I bet the parents of those children care that he was torturing animals before and the warning signs were there. So it's not a stretch at all. This has been very well documented. And I will, before the end of this podcast, I will find the name of that particular incident. So that societal allowance for violence to animals, I believe, is something that's taught sort of in the way that racism in some places is taught, this us versus them. Oh, their skin color's different, their features are different, their customs are different, whatever it might be. Therefore, slavery might be natural because we have a difference between us, and therefore there's one is better than the other, and therefore one is caged. And these aren't really big steps to make these leaps. The racism, sexism, and something called speciesism, where you're able to say, I'm better than you, therefore I can do really whatever I want, has always been detrimental to society. From an economic standpoint, this is the Plant-Based Business Hour after all. Sexism is horrible for the GDP because it keeps a very smart sector of society from actually adding to GDP. Only look at Switzerland. Women didn't even have the right to vote until the 1990s.
Wow.
So, these things are incredible. So then one last thing I wanted to say is, you were saying, obviously we don't have feathers and we don't fly, and there's so many differences between us, but there are so many things that are similar. And I'll point everyone to a book circa 1850 by the author Charles Darwin. Perhaps you've heard of him. It's a book called on the emotion of man and animals. And it maps through his work 6 emotions that man and animals share. And since the 1850s, more have been discovered. Off the top of my memory, that's going to be happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, which I was kind of fun to learn about, and one more. And then one that wasn't on there that I see in my own animals around me is embarrassment. I see that emotion and that reflection in their eyes and behavior. You know, if they've like gone after the garbage in my house and then they're like, oh, shoot, I shouldn't have done that. Or maybe it's guilt. I don't know what it is. But anyway, so we share so many of, and you had mentioned this, Christine, we share so many of these qualities that are intrinsic to who we both are, regardless of the fact as if we can both fly. So, and to ignore that, then the next step is that detriment to society by drawing a line between the two. So I love that you chose children's books as a way of helping younger generations see this. Excuse me, just getting over a cold. So you mentioned, okay, for their parents as well, because I want the parents to read it. But I really think children's books is a great way to help shape society. So I wondered if that was a conscientious choice in your.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, because we can talk about, look, I mean, there's so many horrific examples of violence towards animals, towards people, towards our planet. And you can be left, you're a sensitive person like we are, you can be left feeling with, well, how in the world, how do you begin to tackle these immense issues that we deal with? And for me, you know, maybe it sounds very simplistic, but I think it boils down to something as simple as the golden rule and teaching compassion to children, because as if we're talking about, it's all, everything is related, right? So if we can teach children that, maybe that message will build on, and they will have compassion for not just this one bird in this story, but they can open up their hearts and say, well, all animals have feelings like me. He felt scared. He had a dream. I have a dream. Other animals' feelings should matter to me. And I think maybe not, you know, at age, you know, 4, maybe it will take longer, but at some point my hope is that it will allow this domino effect, where probably just like you and I as children, at some point you will say, well, why, you know, if I don't think it's okay for people to make Flaco feel sad, why is it okay for someone to do that to another animal? And maybe that's an animal that we typically eat, an animal that we typically use for animal testing, or some other, you know, horrible use in our society. I hope that it can build on there. At the same time, as a children's book, and I say this as a mom who has read, you know, hundreds, from maybe thousands at this point of books, it's a really delicate balance of doing that, this kind of messaging in a children's book. Because in the first instance, you want someone to, one, buy that book. It's not the child, it's a caregiver, a parent, you know, someone who's gifting it. And then you want, once that book is in the home or the library, wherever, you want people to actually want to read it. And that's both the children and the adults. And I've personally had the experience of being gifted or purchasing myself other children's books that had a great message, and I totally align with, you know, the pro-animal message, but it's been done in a way that my children don't want to read the story. It's too scary. It's too sad. You know, it's not the type of book you want to read to your child at bedtime, because it doesn't have the happy ending, and that's a no-go. You've reached a dead end at that point, right? You write that book, but you have no audience. No one wants to buy it. No one wants to read it. So the challenge for me was, how do I create a story that's captivating and entertaining for children and their parents or caregivers, and yet is able to, you know, eloquently articulate this important message that I want to convey. I hope that I have achieved that. And so kind of the way I framed it in my mind was planting a seed versus hitting somebody over the head with messaging. And I think, to me, I think that's the best way to do it in a children's book.
And again, on screen, you'll see Freebird, Flaco, the owl's dreams take flight. This is a graphic, I guess you wouldn't call it a graphic novel, but a graphic children's book. Yes, it's illustrated.
It's
Yes,
a picture book. Yeah.
it's a picture book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Give a shout out to my wonderful illustrator, Ofra Isler, who did just an incredible job with her beautiful watercolors of Flaco and the other animals.
Yeah.
So, thank you to Ofra.
Really beautiful. Really, really beautiful. Well, I see definitely the appeal in writing a children's book. I was doing some volunteer work in Africa with black rhinos, and I was in the bush for about 3 weeks, and I came across in my volunteer work with some other folks that were working on plumbing. And this woman and her husband had come to Africa, and he was the engineer. So he had the work permits, and she was just doing volunteer work in school. Not just, she was doing volunteer work in schools. And what she decided to do ended up having more impact than his work of engineering, bringing people plumbing and thus bathrooms. They couldn't do a bathroom in everyone's house. It wasn't that kind of scenario, but he could do one outhouse that had plumbing so that people weren't going to the bathroom in their own water source, which was obviously a cause for disease. But adults didn't want to change their way because they didn't want there to be any smells in the bathroom, and then for them to leave the bathroom and for everyone to know and see them leave the bathroom. So then everyone be able to associate those smells with them. So they didn't want to use the outhouse. So she decided, because she had been volunteering in these small schools, to write a children's book about why it's better for us to use outdoor plumbing and to get the kids used to the idea that this was better for their health and it was sanitary. And you could do that with children in a way you couldn't do that with an adult. And in a way, her volunteer work on that children's book had more impact than his engineering of the actual plumbing itself.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, it's so true. And I mean, I think you think back to our own childhood readings. Aren't there books that stick out in your mind that really moved you as a child? I mean, there's so many for me.
Me too.
You know, Black Beauty, Charlotte's Web, you know, absolutely. I think the power of children's books is probably underrated. It really is. It's such an important thing to be able to educate the next generation. That's what I think of, like, who's going to be there after us? We need the next generation of people that are going to stand up for animals and really, I think children's books are the perfect vehicle for planting that seed of compassion for the next generation.
Yes, and a way to really put forth education and information while building, you know, compassion and entertaining. I think of some children's books that I only found as an adult, and that I got them for all of my friends who were parents and were reading to their kids, about Where Did Chickens Come From? I believe that's the name of the book. And it goes through all these great facts about chickens, like chickens can remember up to 100 names and faces, and, you know, all these facts about animals that we completely disregard as like a nugget. I mean, I just even hate to say that. So there's so much power in the children's book. Now, you say that you've been an animal advocate for quite a while. In how so? In what way?
Well, I mean, I identified, I guess, from a very young age as somebody who loved animals. And I grew up having pets that I loved. And I was probably, I'd say when I was around 11 years old, I had a project in the English class, which, thank goodness, my little small town actually had a PETA book. It was You Can Save the Animals. And I read that book cover to cover, read, you know, stumbled on, you know, Peter Singer's seminal novel, Animal Liberation, everything else. It just kind of opened my eyes, you know, of the way animals are treated in society. So as a kid, you know, I was the lone, you know, vegan in my small town, trying to help other people understand why they should stop eating meat. And it has just always carried through. I'm an attorney. My you know, my background is I started a law firm on Wall Street, did corporate investigations, litigation for Fortune 500 companies, but I always knew my passion was helping animals. So I combined that with a lot of pro bono and volunteer work for animals. I was the chair of the Animal Law Committee of the New York City Bar Association for many years, where I led legal and policy efforts to help shape laws in New York City and New York State, federal laws that help animals. And we've worked on everything from legislation relating to the treatment of downed animals, the cows that are so lame they cannot even stand as they make their way to slaughter. And we've all seen, maybe people forgot, the horrendous videos of animals literally being bulldozed out of stockyards to slaughterhouse trucks. Dealt with all sorts of legislation related to that, to captive animals, on the link between animal cruelty and interpersonal violence. Some amazing wins we've had in New York City were banning the sale of dogs and cats. Then later led to the sale of rabbits, and I know there's a bill coming up that would hopefully ban the sale of parrots and other wild birds that really should not be sold as pets either. But that brings me to, I guess, what I see also is kind of the benefit of Flaco's legacy. There are now a package of bills before New York City Council known as Flaco's laws. One of those bills has actually already passed, which is simply amazing. As we talked about earlier, Flaco passed away when he crashed into a high-rise building in Manhattan. And when they did an autopsy of Flaco, they found that he had high levels of rat poison in his system, which was likely a contributing factor to him crashing into a window. Although there are at least 250,000 birds that crash into windows just in New York City alone and die. And compound that, it's millions if we look at birds around the world. So the bills really target, some of those things that contributed to Flaco's death. And so the first bill that did pass was a replacement of the use of rat poison with birth control for rats. So we're now in the process of phasing out rat poison, which is just incredible.
That's amazing.
Yeah, because rat poison just in and of itself is just these animals die a horrific death.
Yeah.
Right. And then as part of the the urban food chain, Flaco
don't want it.
Consumed rats and pigeons and other animals that would have consumed that poison, and obviously, was a contributing factor in his death. But that's the case for so many other birds of prey and all other animals. Where poison goes up the food chain. So that bill has passed, which is just incredible. So thank you to all the animal advocates who helped to make that happen. The other two bills that we're still lobbying for relate to the use of bird-safe glass in construction in the city. So for birds, when they see transparent or reflective glass, they're not always able to distinguish that glass from air. And so maybe you've had this experience, viewers in your own home, where a bird has just suddenly slammed into a window.
Right.
Because the bird can't tell it's not air. So one of the bills is to mandate use of bird-safe glass in new construction, or for retrofitting old windows with decals, which actually you and I should already, I have them in my home. Everybody listening, please go buy them for your home. You can get them on Amazon or other places. The Audubon Society makes them, these little clear decals, and you just stick them on your window, and it helps the birds somehow from their vision, they are able to distinguish that it is glass, and I can tell you it works. It really will help prevent birds from crashing into windows and suffering and dying. So the bird-safe glass is another bill that is up before City Council. And then the last is addressing light pollution. So having city buildings and other buildings that leave their lights on all night long, shut them off for certain periods of time in the night, because that is another huge factor that contributes to bird deaths. A lot of birds, as they're migrating through the city and at night, will become confused and actually entrapped in some of these lights, or they just fly to exhaustion. We saw this, unfortunately, with the 9/11 memorials. You'll recall when they had the two lights that just went up.
Yes.
So many birds would somehow become entrapped in the lights. They would just fly in circles until they either had heart attacks or died of exhaustion. So the lights really have a detrimental impact on birds. So the last bill is to help reduce light pollution in the city in the nighttime hours to help migrating birds pass through without becoming distressed and by the unnecessary lights. So it's I mean, Flaco is really such an amazing figure in that he has now ignited change for other birds and other animals in the city. And as a lawyer, as someone who's lobbied for and dealt with laws, I think it's just such a wonderful and inspiring and very fitting way to honor his legacy, is to continue to work for change for animals through our legal system.
Thank you for doing that. So very few lawyers do that. So thank you for doing that. I really mean that deeply. Chicago is also on the same path as New York. I'm hoping that something like LA and San Francisco would be as well. But Chicago on the migratory path for birds, and Chicago's McCormick Place, which is right on the border of Lake Michigan, there has at least 250,000 birds a year that are dying because of the glass used at the McCormick Place building. But they have now started playing, for at least a decade, started playing with lights and windows and glare and bird safe windows primarily. So I know it's on their radar as well. Still, I think the even bigger, maybe not bigger issue, but maybe more dramatic issue is that rat poison, which has in so many ways, it seems like who would put poison on their own ground and then think it wouldn't get into your own water or other hunting prey, birds of prey or
pets. I mean, there have been instances where people walking their dogs, their dog eats, an animal that's had the poison or gets into the bait. So absolutely. There's so many unintended consequences of these uses of poison.
And I always hope that, speaking of animal laws in New York City and Chicago, I always hope that the next law is no more horse and carriage. Do you think we'll ever see that?
I sure hope so. I mean, that's been an issue that has been lobbied for so many years in the city. And in my book, I pay tribute to the horses. There's an image of a sad-looking horse pulling a carriage in New York City. And again, shout out to my illustrator, but one of the things I wanted to convey and do it in pictures rather than in text was the feelings of all the animals. So in the images we have from the zoo in the book, you'll see the other animals that are in their enclosures, and they're all dreaming of what would life be like if I was in my, my real home, the plains of Africa or, the jungle. And I did the same for the horse, who's the sad horse in New York City, who's pulling the carriage, and he's dreaming what it would be like if he could just be a horse enjoying his time in the pasture. For nothing else, I think New York, you don't think of as a place where it's home to so many animals, but it is. There,
it is
urban wildlife. There are the horses. There are the millions of dogs and cats, and New Yorkers care about animals, and New York has always led the way in being a leader for humane treatment of animals. So I hold out hope that yes, one day the sad carriage horse industry will go away.
I hope this too.
Yeah, but it takes all kinds. It takes teaching kids why no, we're not going to go take that ride, and this is why. And, I have that image in there, and I hope that a child reading that book and looking at the pictures will ask, well, what's going on with the horse there?
Yeah. Wonderful. Again, thank you for that. Tom Vincel, who's out of Chicago, and he's been helping me actually on the side because he knew that I needed the Nicholas Cruz name. Everybody, it's Nicholas Cruz, who was torturing animals and being quite evident about it publicly on YouTube, and the police knew about it, and we're like, we're just not going to bother here. And then he went on to do the Parkland shooting in Florida. Thanks for that, Tom. So Tom's asking, can you ask her about the avian bird flu spreading to wild birds? We had several hundred die in Chicago recently. Obviously, not just Chicago, around all of the United States, just hundreds of thousands of birds decimated in a heartbeat. Now, avian bird flu, everyone, if you think it's new, it is not. If you think it's a couple years old, it is not. Since the 90s, we haven't gotten, its genesis is even before the 90s, but it's been an uncontrolled epidemic globally, Asia, Europe, the US, since the 90s. So we're looking at 3+ decades. We have not gotten that under control. And our approach to addressing this is just to kill hundreds of thousands of birds at a pop and then do the exact same thing that spread the disease. And we think that by decimating birds by the hundreds of thousands and doing the same practices, we will somehow avoid that it spreads to other animals and humans. And indeed, this year, 2024, it did make the jump to cows and humans. So you got to wonder, like, what are we thinking there in our own best interest? Anyways, if you could comment for Tom about avian bird flu,
Sure.
and if you see any solution out of that.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is absolutely. It can spread to wild birds. And this is a crisis of our own making. You know, as
Yes.
at Elysabeth, I mean, the way we treat poultry, as we call them here in the United States, birds that are chickens, turkeys, they are kept by the billions in the most horrific conditions imaginable. If we thought Flaco's conditions were bad, you don't want to see what the inside of a factory farm looks like. And then, you know, these are the animals that, going back to the law, there is not a single federal law that deals with the humane treatment of animals on the farm.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means from the moment they're born to the point that they get onto a truck to slaughter, there's not a single federal law that protects them, that says you need to treat them this way, you can't do that, you can't do that. There are piecemeal state laws, but with rare exception, state laws will categorically exempt farmed animals from cruelty codes. So they will say customary animal husbandry practices are not covered by state cruelty laws. So you have zero federal oversight of what happens on the farm. And that's why chickens can be kept in these disgusting conditions where literally, you know, dead chicken next to a live chicken. They live in the most unsanitary conditions. You wouldn't be able to walk into a barn without a mask and having your eyes, you know, eroded
the ammonia.
Fumes. They live and breathe that. And so, of course, are we surprised that these animals get sick? And then we prophylactically give them antibiotics that create antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which, you know, when the farm sewage is dumped into your local waterways, we surprised that you know ends up back to us. So the short answer is of course it can make the jump in it, and it's all of our fault. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the rest of the laws that do or do not apply to the chickens. So after they leave, if they are alive when they've grown to their slaughter weight at these farms, they are packed into trucks. There's something called the 28-hour law, which restricts the number of hours that you can transport livestock, but chickens and other poultry are exempt. There's also something known as the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, which is supposed to render animals unconscious before their throats are slit. Well, guess who's exempt from those laws?
Oh, God.
Poultry are exempt. There's zero regulation of how animals can be killed in these slaughterhouses. So you'll have so many examples, and there was just a great expose by Nicholas Kristof in the Times last week about cows having their legs chopped off and ears cut off while they're fully conscious. That's not supposed to happen under the law. Of course, there's lack of enforcement, but for chickens,
no enforcement here, everyone.
Those laws just don't exist for those animals. They are treated without an ounce of compassion by this industry. So it's no surprise that we are living in a scenario where there's bird flu that has been created by this industry. And as you point out, the ways that they're choosing to deal with this is to simply very cruelly kill the animals that are in these barns. Often the most common practice is called ventilation shutdown, where they simply pump hot air and turn off the circulation system in these barns until the chickens and other birds literally just die of heat exhaustion. It's a slow, painful death that can take hours and hours and hours, and that's perfectly legal. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, as I was reviewing some of the statements that the Central Park Zoo put out after Flaco escaped, and then after he died, one of the things that they continue to say to this day is that the vandal who made the hole in Flaco's enclosure, they say that he or she, whoever the vandal was, is responsible for Flaco's death.
Oh,
and
sure.
back to the law and animals being treated as property, there are certain exceptions, I guess, in the law where animals could be freed. If you think of some states like California, New York, some other states, if you see a dog or a cat in a hot car, the windows up, there is what's called a right to rescue law, where you're allowed to go and break the window and save that animal. And although the law hasn't, I think, caught up to a situation like Flaco's, or a situation where people go and try to rescue dead and dying, chickens from factory farm situations, where you'd be able to say, is there a right to rescue there? I'd say that it should recognize those situations. And I'd say the person who, the quote unquote vandal who opened Flaco's cage, because of that person, that's the only reason Flaco got to enjoy a year of freedom. If not for that person, Flaco would probably still be suffering in his cage in the zoo. So thank you to whoever did that, first and foremost.
So maybe this is a time to talk about zoos. I mean, just I think people say, gosh, I want my kids to see elephants, and we're not going to Sri Lanka today, so we'll go to the zoo. What do you have to say to parents as zoo, as a way of educating your children about the wonders of the animal world?
I grew up going to zoos, and as a kid, first it was, I love animals, I want to go see them, and I think that's what most parents think. No one takes their kids to a zoo because let's go, sees the poor state animals. They think the animals maybe are happy, and that's a good place for them. But what I'd like this book to help people think about is just kind of challenging the status quo of, what is the point of zoos? Why are the animals there? I mean, if you take, again, an example like Flaco, who's a species that is not threatened, why was he forced to spend his life in captivity for entertainment? And I think that's what it comes down to. If you look at the size of the parking lots at these zoos and SeaWorld, which is also AZA accredited facility, just like most zoos, there's more space for cars to park than we give these animals that would normally, have habitats that are surely bigger than these parking lots. There's a lot of what I would think to be lip service paid to conservation efforts by zoos. And I don't want to discredit actual successful conservation programs where animals have been held captive and bred and ultimately released. I would celebrate that. But I think that's the exception and not the rule. If you look at the case of pandas, which are considered the megafauna of zoos and attract so much money and so many visitors, there hasn't been a single panda released into the wild. Yeah. In the history of zoos and captive breeding. There simply is not. And that's the case for so many animals. Zoos may be able to point to some discrete species where they've done that, but by and large, the animals that are in zoos, they will continue to live in those zoos. Their children will continue to live in zoos. The efforts that are made towards legitimate conservation just pale in comparison to the funds and efforts of the zoos for entertainment purposes. Frankly, that's what zoos have become. I think if you asked most people that patronize and say, what did you learn today, about conservation efforts? Many of them may be able to say, well, I think those animals are endangered, and so the zoo is helping them, but they can't point to, and the zoo, quite frankly, can't often point to concrete progress or help that's actually coming about because of the zoos. So to me, it's like warehousing animals for entertainment versus actually contributing towards conservation of species.
I think most people would say, I have no idea if this zoo does conservation. It's not really why I'm here. It's because yesterday I took my child to basketball. So today I'm taking them to zoo.
Right.
I would argue that if you did want to show beyond just filling time, if you did want to show your children something about wildlife and the wild world, and of course children are mesmerized by animals and love them. So there are so many sanctuaries and of all kinds, snakes that and reptiles that have been rescued from the movie industry, elephants that have been rescued from the circus industry, clearly dolphins and whales and things, although there aren't really sanctuaries for those animals. Hopefully, I think they can be released, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Maybe if Tom Vincel is still with us, he can look to see what that would be like. But for land animals, there is a sanctuary for absolutely everything. And so if you're in a big city, which is usually where you go to zoos, there is an equal or better than sanctuary that will show you the exact same thing, and your child will have a truly better experience. And I'll lastly say, as we sort of wrap up our chat today, I remember when my parents made the connection for me that like a fur coat was an animal. I remember it. It's so clear. We were in the lobby of our apartment building in Chicago, and I was screaming bloody murder. And I was screaming at them. And I was a really well-disciplined child. And I was, because they had bought me a fur coat. And I said, well, where's the rabbit? It was for Easter.
Oh.
And I said, well, where's the rabbit? And they said, well, the rabbit's now in the coat. And I ended up fainting, and Easter was canceled. My mother kept saying in the elevator when they took me back upstairs, you have to get rid of the coat. You have to get rid of the coat. And like the doorman, it was a huge public embarrassment. Like the Valley people were bringing the cars. The doorman was, calling people taxis. It was Easter. Other people were waiting with their little bonnets. And in the lobby of this downtown apartment building, I was just screaming because I couldn't believe that my parents had done this to a rabbit. Now, actually, my parents didn't go out and kill the rabbit, but they went out and bought the coat that killed the rabbit. So, I just couldn't believe that this kind of atrocity was taking place at the hands of my parents on animals. And so I just caution parents who are like, reading Old MacDonald How to Farm and how happy everybody is. And then at some point the children ask, well, where did this chicken come from? And it's an enormous betrayal. My 2 cents.
I agree. I think children are born with this innate connection of compassion for animals, and I think somewhere along the lines it's kind of taught out of us, right? Where it's okay to treat some animals this way. It's okay to have some animals as pets, and we love some, we eat the others, and it's really sad that such an important and an innate thing leaves us, and so I'm hoping that there will be more efforts to retain that basic integrity of and wholeheartedness of compassion for animals, and maybe this book will help to plant a seed. If it changes the mind of one child or one adult, I will consider it a success, because I think there are those kids out there that once they discover the truth, that's it, it's over for them. Like they know that's not right. And whether mom or dad says, well, this is what we do, they have, those are the future animal advocates that are going to and continue this work.
Yes, and squashing the compassion of a child is a societal failure. That is a hard cash bet for future societal failure. We leave everyone with that, except we're going to have a couple of very fast, quick exit questions. Many people want to be an author. Many people want to leave their career and suddenly write children's books. Do you have any words to the wise about how to make that happen? How'd you get a publisher? I mean, what can you share with us? You very successful first-time author.
This is my first time, so I'm a total novice at this, but I had a story that I felt had to be told. And I think you start with that. What story needs to be told, and you need to work at it, craft it. To me, again, you just know your audience, know who you're writing to, who's going to be reading it. We talked about it in the case of a children's book. You have to write it in a way that people want to pick it up and read it, especially the kids. So that's the first tip, and then the rest of it is, frankly, the work that goes into production, and from the illustrations to formatting to getting a publisher, that can take longer than writing the book.
Yeah.
So do your research. It is a long haul, and then of course marketing the book and getting it out there into the public eye. So it's a lot, but I would say if you have a dream like Flaco had a dream, you have to believe in yourself, and you can do it just like anything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm amazed because you didn't self-publish. You have a publisher.
Yes.
I mean, I can't. How'd you get a publisher?
Yeah. Well, I was lucky to have a personal connection with Lantern Publishing and Media, a wonderful nonprofit publisher who publishes in the space of animal rights and animal issues. So this was a perfect fit, but I'm so grateful to them. But yeah, I mean, for those of you out there, of course, please check out and support Lantern. Lantern's a great organization, but you really have to kind of do the legwork and get out there and research.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, for my book, I also want to give a shout out to one of the charities that I'm contributing to. I'm giving half of all the proceeds to my book to the Wild Bird Fund. And they're a wonderful nonprofit organization in New York City, and they rescue and rehabilitate wild birds and other urban wildlife and release them back into the wilds of New York. So
that's awesome. What is their name again?
The Wild Bird Fund.
Wild Bird Fund. That's awesome. Okay, 3 quickie exit questions, kind of like 1-sentence answers. Give us your initial gut reaction here. What do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
You know more than you think you do, and you're more powerful than you think you are.
I like that for sure. You're more powerful than you think you are. You're having a crazy day. Your publisher's upset. Deadlines aren't being met. What is the one phrase you tell yourself to get yourself back in the groove?
Will this matter 10 years from now?
Okay. Don't sweat the small things.
Yeah, put things in perspective.
Get your perspective. Okay, same busy day, still running around. You didn't have time for lunch. What is your go-to snack?
Oh gosh, I love salts. I'm a saltaholic. I love pickles.
Pickles are that's the first. I mean, I've been doing this podcast a while. Pickles is the first time. You're the first time I've ever had pickles. Wow. And like pickles as in cucumbers or
cucumbers, but pickled I love pickled cabbage, pickled beets. I actually love to make my own pickles at home. It's easier than you think. Really, just vinegar, little sugar, little salt. You can pickle anything, and it tastes divine.
I pickle jalapenos.
Oh, I do that too.
I love it.
Love that. Especially if you have a little plant and you have so many, you don't know what to do with it. Just cut
pickle them.
Yes.
Oh, totally. And I don't even do sugar or salt. I just do white vinegar.
Oh, really?
Call it a day.
Yeah. I mean, hey, whatever works. I add a little in for balance, but yeah, you can do that.
Oh my gosh.
Its own thing.
This has been such a great interview. We talked a little bit about business stuff, but not really. Getting back to my original Awesome Vegans podcast roots. I want to thank Christine Mott, corporate lawyer, gone children's book author, free bird, Flaco the Owl's Dreams Take Flight, about Flaco escaping from the New York City Zoo.
Central Park Zoo, yeah.
Central Park Zoo, and living a life of freedom, mostly in Central Park in New York, becoming New York's mascot, and then his ultimate demise, but really the lessons that we learn when we give animals the freedom that we all want. It's one more thing we share, this drive for freedom, and we all know what that feels like. So Christine Mott, thank you so much. Everybody, the book is out May 6th. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, lots of different places. Christine, do you have a website we should be checking out? Okay.
ChristineMott.com. And for those of you in New York City, I'll be starting a book tour next month. I'll be, my first stop is the Corner Bookstore in New York City, doing a children's storytime event. I'm going to be doing another one at the Greenlight Bookstore in Brooklyn on May 18th, and looking forward to doing some more storytime events in California as well.
Okay, that's awesome. Christine Mott, MOTT.com. If you want more information on Christine, who also is on LinkedIn, as am I. Christine, you don't go anywhere. I want to thank Christine. She's fantastic. Everybody get that book, May 6th. Come on now. Flaco, the Owl's Dreams Take Flight. Get the book, A Freebird. It is out May 6th. Everyone, you know what to do. Let me know how you like the book. Until I see you again on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Happy Easter, everybody. For those who celebrate, happy Passover, everybody. Happy spring, happy summer. Summer is indeed coming. I will see everybody in a couple of weeks. Christine, stay put. Bye, everybody.